Today's lecture is going to focus on Unit 1, Key Issue 2. Why is each point on Earth unique? We're going to split this into three different parts. The first part is going to take on place. We're going to be looking at the characteristics that make each place on Earth a unique location. Next, we're going to be looking at region. We're going to be looking at the characteristics that make each region a unique area. And lastly, we're going to look at culture regions. So we're going to look at some of the characteristics that can help us better understand why a region is considered distinct. First, let's go ahead and recap place. There are three components that might make a place unique. First, let's look at place names, also known as a place's toponym. Remember that toponyms are often associated with the characteristics of a place. Maybe they're based in historical roots associated with settlement, language, or religion. Or perhaps that toponym is associated with physical characteristics of the place. Let's use Vista del Lago High School as an example. Vista del Lago is in Spanish, and it means view of the lake. So first, let's look at the language. California has a lot of places that are in Spanish, and much of this may attribute to the fact that California was once a territory of Mexico. Next, we can look at what Vista del Lago means, which is view of the lake. There's no doubt that our high school sits atop a hill, and you can actually get some pretty spectacular views from campus of the city of Folsom. However, you can't actually see Folsom Lake from our high school. So unfortunately, the name might be a little misleading. The second way that we can describe the location of a place is through sight, looking at the physical characteristics of a place. Some of these characteristics can include climate, water, topography, soil, vegetation, latitude, and elevation. We can use Vista del Lago High School as another example here. So when we look at Vista del Lago's elevation, it sits atop a hill. We also see its proximity to the lake. The last way to identify place is through situation. Remember, there are two ways to identify location of a place: absolute location and relative location. Absolute location looks at degree points using lines of latitude and longitude to find an exact place in which a place exists on Earth's surface. You can also use street addresses. Relative location, on the other hand, is what we categorize as being part of situation. So providing some relative sense of where a place is. And so this is done by giving general directions to someone on how to get to a place. Maybe talking about different streets that they may drive on or different landmarks they may see along the way. Let's look at an example of sight. This is a map that's located in your textbook on page 15, figure 1-17. And it's the changing site of Boston. The site of Boston has been altered by filling in much of Boston's harbor. Colonial Boston was a peninsula connected to the mainland by a very narrow neck. During the 19th century, a dozen major projects filled in most of the bays, coves, and marshes. If you take a look at the key, you can find the dates in which this landfill was made to expand Boston. A major 20th century landfill project created Logan Airport. Several landfill projects continue into the 21st century. Some examples of the major cities that used landfill to expand their land is New York and Tokyo. Now let's take a look at some images that'll help us better understand situation. These two images are from figure 1-18 and are also located on page 15 of your textbook. These two images indicate the situation of Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul is situated on a narrow strait that separates Europe and Asia. Istanbul is situated along the Bosphorus. This is a waterway between the Black and Mediterranean seas. Europe lies to the west and Asia to the east. The satellite image of Istanbul is what you see in the first picture, and Istanbul looking east from Asia toward Europe is what you see in the second picture. Now that we've finished talking about 3 ways that can help us describe the location of a place, we're going to be getting into region and what we can look at when we are distinguishing whether or not a unique area is a region. A region derives its unified character through the cultural landscape. What that means is looking at a combination of cultural features like language, religion, economic features like agriculture and industry, and physical features like climate and vegetation. There are 3 distinct regions described in your textbook. The first region is a formal region, also known as uniform region. It's an area within which everyone shares a common one or more distinctive characteristics, typically characteristics that cannot be debated. They could share a common language, maybe an economic activity like the production of a specific crop, or maybe some type of environmental property like climate. A functional region, also called a nodal region, is an area organized around a node or focal point. The characteristic chosen to define a functional region dominates at a central focus or node and diminishes in importance outward. The region is tied to the central point by transportation or communication systems or by economic or functional associations. And lastly, we've got the vernacular region or perceptual region. This is an area that people believe exists as part of their cultural identity. Let's spend some time talking about formal region. The best advice that I have for you if using examples to describe formal region is sticking to political geography, language, and religion that is common in those regions. That way, when you utilize those examples, you're talking about things that are less disputed. It's very easy to get the characteristics used to describe formal region confused with some of the characteristics used to describe vernacular region. The Middle East can be used as an example of formal region. When we look at some of the shared characteristics in the Middle East, we can look at language, in which Arabic is the common language spoken in the region, and we can look at religion, and Islam is the common religion that is practiced in the region. This does not mean that other religions or languages are not present in the region. It just means that they're not as prevalent as the ones that I named before. Let's spend some time talking about formal region. The map you see here you can find on page 16 of your textbook, and it's figure 1-19. This map shows the 50 states and the direction in which these 50 states voted in the last 4 elections, not to include 2016. The blue states indicate democratically won states. The red states include Republican won states, and the purple states indicate swing states, meaning that there wasn't one political party that won all 4 of those elections. What's interesting about this map, though, is it changed in 2016. Some examples of states that ended up going red instead of blue include Wisconsin and Michigan. The results of these elections help us better understand why we can categorize some regions as being more Democratic and others as being more Republican. Now, I mentioned in 2016 several states flipping, but if we look at the previous 4 years, we can see that there's some consistency that can speak to these regions being formal. Now let's spend some time talking about a functional region. Functional region can also be called a nodal region. What that means is there's some kind of activity that will be located at the node or the central part of that region in which the people who reside in that region utilize that function. The simplest example I can give for a functional region would be a shopping center. When we look at more rural areas or rural towns, we might be able to find just one grocery store in which everyone in that town shops at. And the next grocery store would not be found until the next town over. So people wouldn't have a choice but to shop at that grocery store. For the region in which you live in, you might instead use the Palladio as an example of your node. Let's look at an example that's used in your textbook. This map can be found on page 17 and it's figure 1-20. The circles that you see on this map indicate different regions, and at the center of these regions are nodes, also known as NBC TV stations. At least 50% of the households watching NBC affiliate at the node of the region. You even see two regions overlap a little bit. And so the further out you go from the node, the less likely the people outside of that node are to utilize that function. I like to use the example of news stations. So if we look at the region that you may reside in, odds are you will reside in a region in which the local news station is actually based in Sacramento. And that news station based in Sacramento may also include people who live in Stockton or maybe even Modesto. An example of a region that may overlap the one in which the local news station resides in Sacramento might be a news station based in Fresno. Some other examples you could apply may include cell phone towers or even cable services. It is important to note that new technology is breaking down traditional functional regions. For example, instead of cable services, people may be utilizing popular streaming sites. Instead of shopping at the Palladio or other popular shopping malls, people are deciding that they want to buy their products online. Lastly, let's talk about vernacular region or perceptual region. Remember, this is an area that people believe exists as part of their cultural identity. As an example of a vernacular region, Americans frequently refer to the South as a place with environmental and cultural features perceived to be quite distinct from those of the rest of the United States. Take a look at figure 1-21 on page 17 of your textbook. It's also provided here. Many of these features can be measured. Environmentally, the South is a region where the last winter frost occurs in March and rainfall is more plentiful in winter than in summer. Cultural features include relatively high adherence to the Baptist religion and preference for Republican presidential candidates, relatively low rates of high school graduation, and joining the Confederacy during the Civil War. The last topic we're going to cover is culture and looking at cultural regions. Culture is both what people care about and what people take care of. We're going to be looking at spatial association, which is a pretty important concept of this key issue. It's the degree to which features co-occur in space. Let's take on that first part, what people care about. This can be reflected in the language, religion, or ethnicity that's prevalent in that cultural region. Next, what people take care of. We can take a look at the material wealth that is produced by the people of this culture. What does the food look like? What about the clothing, the shelter? What can we see reflected in architecture? Now for the most important concept, spatial association, the degree to which features co-occur in space. Let's look at the spatial association in Baltimore. This can be found on page 19 of your textbook, and it's figure 1-24. Let's look at a series of categories. The first map you're looking at is going to show you income. The second one, life expectancy. The third, crime. And the fourth, non-conforming liquor stores. Let's look at income first. The highest income neighborhoods are in downtown Baltimore and on the north side, and the lowest income neighborhoods are in west and east Baltimore. Looking at life expectancy. In downtown Baltimore and in the north side neighborhoods, babies are expected to live at least 77 years, whereas in the western and eastern sides of Baltimore, life expectancy is less than 70 years. The distribution of life expectancy in Baltimore displays a strong spatial association with income. The areas with the highest income are also the areas with the highest life expectancy. The spatial association between crime and income is neither very strong nor very weak. The crime rate is relatively low in the high-income northern neighborhoods, but it is not relatively low in the high-income downtown neighborhoods. Baltimore and many cities in the United States have passed laws to limit the number of liquor stores that can exist in a neighborhood. The liquor stores that existed before the laws passed, however, are non-conforming and can still operate. A disproportionate number of these liquor stores still remain in low-income areas, and high-income areas have far less. We're going to continue to talk about this after the lecture.